everybody. Good evening. I'm Matt Harkins, Director of the Literary Arts Institute of the College of St. Benedict. And I'm here to introduce our visiting writer tonight, David Zabel. But first, just a quick reminder to ask everyone to please silence your phones. And then we'll start with the land acknowledgement. Both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University occupy the original homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. We honor, respect, and acknowledge the indigenous peoples forcibly removed from this territory, whose connection remains today. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey previously operated boarding schools for Native children. Now, students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relationships with our Native nation neighbors. Most of the writers we bring to CSB and SJU are fiction writers, poets, or creative nonfiction writers. David Zabel, after studying English literature and drama as an undergraduate, and then more extensive graduate training in theater, took a different path, one rooted in the ancient arts of storytelling and performance as a scriptwriter, showrunner, and executive producer. A quick and very incomplete list of shows he's produced include a Civil War medical drama for PBS, a story about 7 gas station attendants who end up sharing one lucky lottery ticket, a police procedural about a homicide squad in Detroit, and also, for 5 years, he was the executive producer of ER, a rather successful show that ran for a total of 15 years. Some of you may have never heard of it. And if you haven't, ask your parents or George Clooney, he'll tell you. David has worked most recently as executive producer, showrunner, and writer for The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. One of the fun things about this is an international film, that its seasons 1 and 2 were filmed and set in France, season 3, and the not yet released season 4, coming soon, they were filmed and set in Spain, so you have time to catch up on AMC or Prime, and Netflix, there we go. Tonight, David will talk to us about the work he does and how he does it, and there'll be a little audio-visual magic worked into this as well. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and conversations. So will you please join me in welcoming David Zabel.
Thank you. I want to thank Matt, and I want to thank the Literary Arts Institute for welcoming me here. And I do feel a little bit of an outlier, since while I do see myself first and foremost as a writer, my relationship to the literary arts is a bit more attenuated than the guests who usually speak here. I sometimes tell people that I did start out wanting to be a proper writer, but I ended up being what I would call an improper writer, which is to say a Hollywood writer. And in light of that, what I thought I'd briefly talk about is the trajectory and how my interests evolved into working as a screenwriter and then into a producer, and that eventually graduated into becoming this unique position in the world of television called a showrunner. Some of you probably have heard that term, showrunner, before. But I think a lot of people have an idea, maybe what it is, with some uncertainty. And essentially, the showrunner is the executive producer of a series and is in charge of the process from soup to nuts, from the inception of the premise through the delivery and the promotion of the show. Showrunning is kind of like juggling way too many plates and hoping not to break too many, as few as possible. So it can be very stressful, but in the entertainment business, it's a remarkable job. It's about as powerful a creative job as there is, and especially for a writer. So I want to show you a simple scene to start off, just by way of illustration. It's just a simple little scene between a boy and a man, and the man has become sort of the caretaker of this boy. If you've seen Daryl Dixon, this is from the 2nd season of Daryl Dixon, and they are preparing to separate. Sorry, I'm going to turn this aside because I'm speaking to two at the same time. They're preparing to separate. And I just want to show you this scene, and then we'll talk briefly about it right after.
You know where I'm from? They say you blow on those to set your wishes free.
In French, it's called pissenlit. Because if you eat one, it makes you pee in bed. Piss in the lit.
There. Found this in the trunk of a car. Did what I could with the strings. Perzon, teach you how to play that?
You like 70s rock. Neil Young, John Baez, Led Zeppelin. You're not coming, are you?
Somebody has to stay behind. It makes sense that it's me. You want to talk about it?
Why? Want to change your mind? Every time something good happens, something bad comes to ruin it.
It's only temporary.
Then why does it feel like forever? It's a long way to America, and you'll be all alone.
I've been alone before. A lot of times. I'll make it back.
Can't promise that.
Hey, look at me. I can't promise that. I'm gonna see you again. All right? Go ahead. Play something.
Can't always get what you want. Can't always
Get what you want. Can't always get what you want. Try sometimes. Just might find. Get what you need.
So, as a writer, I had the feeling that this scene was necessary. It was necessary. It was necessary to bring out the depth of the bond that had formed between these two, and the vulnerability that they share, and the pain that they face in going their different ways. And so I wrote this scene, and it's a pretty simple scene, right? Now, that's what I did as the writer. As the showrunner, not so simple, because I then had to explain to the studio and the network, who felt that the scene did not advance the plot. I felt I had to explain to them why the scene was necessary, why it was important for the characters, why I felt like it was vital to the story, and it was going to take time and money to shoot this scene, so I had to justify it to them. And I had to convince the director to shoot the scene as planned because he wanted to move it to another location that I didn't think was going to work so well, and I wanted him to film it in the way that I thought it was going to serve the story best. And my main actor, Mr. Reedus there, he questioned the content of the scene and the emotion of the scene, and he also didn't like initially the song that we were going to use. So I had to go through different options and work through different songs that I felt would work, and I had to get them cleared through our music supervisors, and I had to battle over how much the Rolling Stones were going to cost us and whether that was worth it. And that little boy, Louis, who plays Laurent, was uneasy about playing and singing in front of the crew, and so that needed to be managed. He was very nervous. And then in post, when the episode was finally cut together, it was running kind of long, and I had to fight to keep the scene in the cut. Because some people thought, well, you don't need that scene. It's not vital to the plot. To me, it was vital to the characters, and to the story, and to the emotion. So all of that stuff, that was the work of the showrunner. All of that stuff. And on this one little simple scene. So, you know, not so simple, really. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on, but let's go back and talk a little bit about how I got started as a writer. Now, I always had a passion for theater, all the way back to my childhood. My grandmother used to come to New York from her home in not too far from here, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, every other summer, and she would drag me around for 2 weeks from play to play. Broadway, off-Broadway, way off-Broadway, nowhere near Broadway, it didn't matter. One show a day, 2 on Wednesdays, 2 on Sundays if there were matinees. So for me, I had that passion for theater and for dramatic storytelling kind of baked in at a young age. Still, when I went to college, I wanted to be, as I said before, a proper writer. I wanted to write poetry, I wanted to write fiction. I studied at that time with Galway Kinnell and Katha Pollitt and Joyce Carol Oates, among some others. And while I was doing that, I was also indulging my theater Jones. I was working on plays as an actor and a director, and over time, in college, that pursuit became more dominant. Why was that? Well, the simple answer is I went to where my work was being best received. In my college creative writing program, I didn't feel like I was producing at the level that I wanted to. I didn't feel like my work was standing out in the way that I wanted it to. I was good, I felt like I was good, but I was not great, and I felt my peers' work was stronger, and I felt a little bit out of my depth. And meanwhile, at the same time, the stuff that I was doing in the theater, the stuff I was working on, acting in plays and sometimes directing and occasionally writing, that was all better received. And so I felt like I was offering something there that could maybe be singular and impressive. I was 20 years old. I was looking for affirmation, and I was searching for a place where I felt confident. And basically, I leaned in to where it felt like my greatest skills were pulling me. And I think that's really important for young people to keep in mind. You have to find something that you're good at, and then you dig in and you work to try to get great at it. You pursue it, first of all, because you love it, but also because you have skill there, especially in the artistic pursuits, and especially if you want it to be a career. Ideally, that realization or that discovery, it happens maybe during your time in college. For me, it actually happened later. My full coming around to what I ended up doing didn't really hit until my late 20s. I got my first job as a TV writer when I was 29. So it took me 10 years to figure out my way from I want to be a poet to I'm going to be a screenwriter. And the lesson from that, I think, is pretty simple. Be patient with yourself, be prepared to pivot. So in college, for me, the first step in that transition was when I pivoted from primary focus on creative writing to a focus on theater. Spent a lot of time in dark theaters and studio classes and reading Ibsen and Chekhov and Pinter and Miller and Churchill and Shepard and lots of others. And after college, I then attended NYU, the Tisch MFA program, and I went there for 3 years. And what all of that had in common was that I was learning from a bunch of different perspectives, really, about dramatic narrative, about how to tell a good story, how to create interesting characters. But at that point, I still really wasn't focused on TV or film at all. So after NYU, I continued pursuing theater while I was working alternately in New York as a waiter in various restaurants, many of which I either quit abruptly or got fired from. One time I tried to unionize the busboys at a Mexican restaurant, and that did not go over well with the owners. More happily, I also worked as an ESL teacher for immigrants and refugees, and that was a job that I loved, and it actually became the subject of the first TV script that I ended up writing. But in New York, it was hard, and I was struggling, and I wasn't getting much momentum, and after a few frustrating years there, I went out to California because I had some friends who were working there, and it seemed like that was a better place to break in at that point. I was pushing 30, and I wanted to make a decent living. So there was a practical part of it. And once I was in LA, started reading scripts, teaching myself how they worked, read some books like Sid Field's Screenwriting, Robert McKee's Story, among others, the Art of Dramatic Writing by Lajos Agri, which is a great book. I read scripts that were getting made, real scripts that were getting made. And while some of them were good, a lot of them weren't, and that actually emboldened me. It made me feel like I could maybe do that. And so I started writing. I wrote a few screenplays as I was learning, but even then, TV had a really great appeal for me because it felt more character focused, and it felt more intimate than what was in vogue, at least at the time, in movies. There was also more work in TV, plus which I had an idea that lent itself to a series, which became that first TV pilot that I just mentioned, which was a dramedy about an ESL school in a refugee settlement agency that I called Broken English, and that was the first script I wrote. So that script got some attention from an agent. The agent encouraged me to write a sample script, which meant a script for a show that actually existed, that was on the air, to prove that I could emulate something that would make me hireable as a staff writer on a show. That I could do someone else's voices and someone else's characters, and I could bring my own stuff to it, but I could fit within the mold of an existing show. So this was in 1995, and I wrote a spec for a series, if not you, then your parents will remember, called NYPD Blue, and I wrote another for a show called Ally McBeal, and that ultimately did get me in the door, led to a job, which was my first job, which was on the writing staff of this military legal thriller called JAG. I wrote 2 episodes of JAG. It went super well, and then I got fired. Complicated situation, sort of a cost-cutting measure by the showrunner. Showrunner didn't much like me. Feeling was kind of mutual. After that, had trouble. Didn't work for most of a year, and I became convinced that the whole thing was a mistake, and I should reconsider a more reasonable line of work. My mother insisted that it was not too late to go to law school. The truth be told, my mother's 86 years old now, and she still feels that it's not too late for me to go to law school. So if any of you happen to be my mother, please tell her I'm okay. But then I got a second job after a year on a sci-fi show which was called Dark Angel. It was created and it was produced by James Cameron, who had just done a movie called Titanic and was working on this other idea that became a movie called Avatar. And pretty amazing guy to work for. I learned a lot, and I was on that show for a year, and then I got offered a job on the medical series ER, which was the #1 drama in the world at the time, and where I ended up working for the next 8 years. And that time was really formative for me. So having worked in the theater really benefited me in various ways that I had never anticipated. It had taught me to be collaborative in a way that helped me excel in a writer's room. I was able to be productive not only at working on my own ideas and my own scripts, but I was pretty good at helping colleagues figure out their stories, the ones they wanted to tell, and how to execute those stories. So the collaborative nature of my days putting up plays in dusty theaters proved very useful. Now also on ER, even as a low-level staff writer like I was at the beginning, you were expected to sort of function as a producer on your episodes, on the episodes that you wrote. And there too, my experience was conducive to communicating with directors, with designers, with casting executives, with actors, especially with actors. I had a comfort that wasn't really so common because of all that time in those theaters. And so the cast of the show got to like discussing their script concerns with me or their problems with me and working through any bumps or differences of opinion. Now, at ER, you were also expected to be part of the post-production of your episodes, including such things as music scoring, as VFX, sound, VFX is visual effects, sound, editing. And so I was learning a lot on the job because I didn't know about that stuff much. And my boss, the showrunner of ER, he appreciated that I was picking these things up, and he was giving me more responsibilities as we went on as a producer. So that meant being the point person on PR and marketing for a period of time for the show. And at another time, I was coordinating and managing all the network and studio notes that we would kind of have to receive and then sort through and discuss and decide how we were going to act on all those notes. So when you see that long list of producers on the credits of a TV show and you wonder, what do all those people do? Like, why are there so many producers? Well, part of the answer is that a lot of them are the writers on the staff of a show. It could be anywhere from 4 to 10 writers who are also producers on the show, depending on the kind of show and the situation. There are also a lot of non-writing producers up on that list with specific jobs like post-production and line production, for instance. And then also some of those names are usually, a couple at least, are producers who are collecting checks. It's like a mafia no-show job, which is good work if you can get it. And it's actually a problem in the business at a time when shows cost way too much. But that's for another time, or we can talk about that later. Little pet peeve for me. In any case, within a few seasons, I was asked to take over as showrunner, this thing called showrunner. It was season 10 of ER at that point, very successful show. I ran it for the next 5 years until the show ended in 2009. When I started running it, I was 38 years old, and I was suddenly responsible. You know, I'd been in dusty theaters and typing out scripts, but I was suddenly responsible for a series that employed about 300 people all in and cost about almost $100 million a season. So it was a far cry from scrounging for tips and organizing busboys at the Caliente Cap Company. And I was very aware of that leap. It was intimidating. It was daunting, you know, because that was a big responsibility that was very different than what you start out with as a writer who wants to tell stories and create characters. And I learned enough, though, from being on the stage to try to never let them see you sweat. So that's how I got through the beginnings. Just like, I'm going to act like I'm completely prepared for this. So that's how I became a showrunner. Now, the system at ER was an incredible training ground. It's really the platonic ideal of how a well-run show should be managed. So I learned from the best. I inherited a very high-functioning method for how to make a television show. And that really brings me back to this topic that I started with, which, what is a showrunner exactly? Like, what do they do? In what ways are the responsibilities of a showrunner related to or derivative of or different from the job of a script writer, whose main function is to serve on a writing staff and help work out ideas and comment on and note each other's scripts and also script your own episodes. So a showrunner is the creative executive, almost always a writer, and usually the show's creator, who is in charge of the entire process of making a television show from front to back. So let's discuss the process a little bit, the process of making a television show. It starts with the pitch. The pitch is when the writer develops the premise of the show, its characters, its narrative structure, its format, a plan for multiple episodes and seasons, and then presents that in an effort to sell a buyer or multiple buyers on the idea. So the pitch is a spoken presentation. Sometimes you bring in a visual component to show some things. The premise, you know, now the premise of any pitch might be based on other material. It's sometimes referred to as IP, intellectual property. So like Game of Thrones or Heated Rivalry, these are based on book series. Or it could be a wholly original piece of content like Severance or The Diplomat, which are completely created by their creators. Increasingly, in recent years, there's a lot more reliance on IP because it's deemed to be a safer bet. And so that's resulted in a lot more shows based on existing properties, even on things like games, Last of Us, or on a promotional character like Ted Lasso. And of course, lots of shows from within established universes like Star Wars or Marvel, or in my case, The Walking Dead. So it's gotten harder for wholly new ideas to break through. And that's true in the film business as well. It's not been a boom time for originality. And it's really something that creatively in my business people are struggling with. How do we hold on to original ideas and keep making them when it's safer, when it's deemed safer to make something that already is known? So how does the pitching process go? How do you pitch? Well, I recently took out an original pitch. I met with a bunch of companies, 4 in total: HBO Max, Netflix, FX, and AMC. Pitched all 4 of them my idea, and which means that I go in and I do a little song and dance that takes about 25 minutes, where I tell them all of my ideas and why it's going to be a great show and the biggest, and then they're going to love it more than anything ever. And then they'll ask me some questions usually, and usually at the end they'll say, well, thanks, that's great. Well, let us think about it and get back to you. That's usually what happens. These used to always be in person. It's like human beings in a room talking to each other. Now it's almost always on Zoom. Very different experience. And so you hope when you pitch that you're going to find just one buyer, because it only takes one. You need one. Sometimes you don't find any. It's a real bummer. It's happened to me a number of times. Pretty disappointing. Nobody wants to buy your great idea. On this last one, went very well. Of the 4, 3 of them wanted to buy it. So 3 of them were bidding to try to get this project that I had proposed. And for various reasons, my fellow producers who I brought into the project and we decided to do it with Netflix. So that's what I'm doing now, writing a pilot for Netflix. So once the pitch, that's the first part, the pitch. The pitch has been bought, and the next phase is to write the pilot script. The pilot is the first script, the first episode. And sometimes they'll order multiple scripts right from the start, but there are lots of factors determining whether that happens. In this case, it's just the one. And that initial writing period will usually take some months, maybe 2 or 3, to get that first script done from outline to final draft. And then, if we are blessed, in 2 or 3 months, Netflix will say, okay, love the script, let's make the pilot, let's make the show. Maybe they'll even say, let's make the series. We want to order 8 episodes off of your 1 pilot script, so you need to write some more, and we're going to start planning to shoot. In either case, that's when my job begins as a showrunner. I've graduated out of just writing, and now I'm the showrunner, because once something is ordered and put into production, it's a show and it's got to be run. Up until then, I've really functioned as a writer, which I love. I love when I get to only function as a writer. And I also love being a showrunner, but it gets much more complicated at that point. So that's where we've gone from the first step, the pitch, to the second step, the pilot, to the third step, the prep, or the pre-production. Now, a bunch of things kick in once you get the show order. And if you haven't done it yet, you need to hire a team of writers and you need to get them going to help realize the vision in subsequent episodes. You also need to figure out the budget and how to spend whatever amount of money you can pry from the cold, lifeless hands of the corporate entity who ordered it. And who, because it's a business, they want everything to be as cheap as possible. And at this point, you're starting to live in this permanent existential conflict, because you need to balance your job as a responsible executive in charge of a lot of people and a lot of money that has been entrusted to you with your creative mission, vision as a writer, as a creator, to make it as good as it can be and to preserve sort of the inspiration of it. So the manager and the artist, they're at war, and you're wearing both uniforms. And so it's an ongoing conflict that you have to navigate as a showrunner. Also in prep, with the help of a line producer, you have to figure out where you're going to shoot the show, what the technical needs will be, how to spread various budgetary buckets, how much you're going to spend on locations, how much for casting, how much for special effects, how much for costumes, and you have to start assembling the team, hiring departments like production design and costumes and stunts and hair and makeup, all these departments, all these people. At the same time, you have to be searching for directors who will direct the show, especially the first one, which is crucial, the pilot, because that's going to set the tone for the entire series, sets the look of the show and the vibe and the feeling of everything to come. So you've got to start the most crucial part of the prep at that point also, the most important thing, which is casting. And you have to put together a group of actors that, if things go well, will not only be great, but they can last and stick together for numerous seasons moving forward. So that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff going on simultaneously. A lot of difficult, impactful choices and decisions that have to be made, and a team of collaborators that has to be assembled and consulted, and you're the point person. You're the main decider. And always, as I said, art pulling you one way, money pulling you another. Art, money, art, money. And that often leads to some dissent, some conflict within the group. There's a lot of egos involved. There are jobs and careers at stake, and it's all got to be handled. And that part, prep, pre-production, that's usually in the space of, let's say, 6 to 10 weeks. 6 to 10 weeks. And then it only gets harder, because then you hit step 4. After prep, you roll cameras, and now you're in production. You're shooting. And that always feels too soon, and you never feel ready. Rewrites are usually necessary, so you're also dealing with that. And it could also, the rewrites can be for a variety of reasons. It could be because the star you signed has a slightly different idea of how her role should be realized, or the location that you booked fell through, or the picnic scene in the script is scheduled to be shot during what is now a hailstorm, and you've got to switch it. And you're managing the ongoing work of production as well as the personalities, right? So you've got the director of photography is yelling because the production designer made a set that is unlightable, unlightable. And the location manager didn't get the permits to crash the car on the street that we secured. We have the street, but we can't crash the car. And the whole point is crashing the car. The animal handler can't find a horse that's going to pull a buggy straight. The horse keeps going on. And so all of that is why you're still prepping episodes to come after that as well. So then once the shooting gets going, you hit the next phase, which kicks in and continues simultaneously, and that's post-production. And post-production begins in earnest when you start getting cuts of the assembled footage and working on that and trying out different editorial approaches, putting in temp music and sound and effects and sharing these cuts with your collaborators and getting notes back to consider. And the composer at some point starts writing music based on the temp that you've put in the cut, and also on the spotting session where you sat down with the composer and watched the episode together and talked through the musical ideas. And then you do the same thing with sound, you do the same thing with visual effects. The visual effects that are created by computer graphics, if you're not familiar with that, and other methods. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a second. So prep for that, for visual effects, for VFX, that really starts earlier, because we discuss and we plan for what we're going to anticipate we're going to need during the shoot, because you have to shoot things with that in mind, of what you're going to need to affect later. And after the shoot, to allow the visual effects artist to help create the environment of the story. It's a technical thing, but it's crucially important, especially in certain shows like like a science fiction show or like the show I've been doing, Daryl Dixon, where the VFX are really part of creating the world and telling the story. So I think post-production is the least understood maybe, and most undervalued part of making the show. Editing the picture, for example, for me is crucial. It's like the final rewrite from a storytelling perspective. And it requires a lot of precision and care, and it's why I think it really needs a writer's sensibility to home in on how best to use the images that have been captured to finally tell that story. It's your last chance to fix. In my case, it's my last chance to fix things that I didn't get right before in the writing, or things that changed or evolved and need to be addressed. And building the atmosphere of the world of your story is absolutely dependent on all the visual enhancements that you do in post. And it's especially true, like I said, in genre storytelling, in science fiction, in horror, in fantasy. So I actually had to do a lot more in that area, this VFX post-production area on Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, than I did on other shows, because most of my other shows were more in the real world space. And so what I thought I'd do right now is I'll show you a couple of things to illustrate how that all works. So first off, I just want to say, on Daryl Dixon, we had a really remarkable, top-notch team in post-production visual effects, VFX. It was a combination of French and American artists. They were really crucial to realizing some of the stuff we did on the show. And what I'm going to share with you now is that it's a little presentation for some of the work they did throughout season 3. Season 3 dropped in October. These guys, my VFX team, they won a big European Effects Award, actually, for this work. And they also were nominated for one here in the US. And it's pretty cool. I will warn you, I can't avoid it because of the nature of the show. There is a little gore and violence in this. So if you're squeamish, be prepared. Avert your gaze. Not too much, but it's there. So I gotta just find. Now you're gonna see my desktop with all of my stuff on it. And you'll see here, you'll get it when you see it, but it'll show you models that they make, and it'll combine it with the actual footage that we shot, and you'll see the final images sort of juxtaposed against each other. We'll talk a little bit more about it on the other side. Oh, the volume? can see, a lot of what we're doing is creating the apocalyptic environment. A lot of that work has to be done by VFX. Some of it is sort of the violence that's in the show. Obviously, it has to be affected. And fire, we don't use a lot of real fire, so a lot of fire, we use a little bit of real fire because that helps make it feel real, but then we have to add fire when there are fire related sequences. And so that just gives you sort of an overall idea of what the VFX guys do on my show, VFX people. Another thing I thought would be of interest is to show you just one sequence, one particular sequence. I'll show you the raw cut of it, meaning the first cut, when nothing has been done to it. It's just the film that's been shot, edited together with temp music and temp effects and temp sound, and then and then after that we can sort of look at how the sequence ultimately aired when it was done. The story in this little sequence I'm going to show you is that our heroes have come into London and they've met the only remaining human alive there who also happens to have a sailboat, and they agree that they're going to set sail for America. So this is them leaving London. The other thing I wanted to say, oh no, that's it. All right, we'll look at that, and then this is the first assembled cut, what's called the director's cut. You've probably heard the term before we've really done anything to it. And then I'll show you how it aired.
Keep her steady. And pull. That's the first assembled cut. And now I'll play you what finally aired. And note, some things are obvious. Visually, a lot of it will be obvious, but even the sound, the music, there are things that are more subtle. Even the color timing, we change the palette a little bit in color timing, which is when we can affect that in post. So try to note those things as well. It's great that I'm so good with technology, or else none of this would ever work. Here we go. Keep her steady. And pull.
So that gives you an idea of what we're doing in post, and it's pretty complicated. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of real artistry to it, to all those jobs, to the visual effects artists and the sound designers and the composer, obviously. And that's refined over a lot of revisions, which takes usually about 10 to 12 weeks to do post on one episode. But you're posting many episodes at the same time, so you're overlapping. But the total post, from the time you get the first cut to the time you're finished with it, as an estimate, 10 to 12 weeks. And that's really a very tough period when you're showrunner, because what you've got at that point is you are writing some episodes, A, you are prepping some other episodes, B, You are shooting some, C. You are posting some others, post-production, and you're doing all of that at the same time. And that's all while a bunch of other people from the show, from the studio, from the network are giving you notes and expressing opinions and trying to affect what you're doing. They say in positive ways, but I'm not always sure. And you have to definitely kind of weather that so as to preserve the heart, the soul of the venture, and not let it get sanded down into some kind of mushy goulash of committee-determined mediocrity. That's a real test in television business, in the film business too, is that balance, holding on to what you think makes it special, even when there's a lot of people who want to sort of, take chinks out of the armor. So, and there's no way to really do that without being a pretty efficient multitasker, being able to delegate some work to others, and that really hinges on your ability to hire well, assemble a really good team, communicate with them on what you want. And to me, that's probably the simplest way to define the most fundamental way to succeed as a showrunner. Hire well, collaborate well, communicate well. And amidst all of that, you have to keep your eye firmly, though, on why you set out in the first place. You had a story to tell. You had characters that compelled you. You had something to express that you felt could ultimately be entertaining or stimulating or moving to an audience. And that's the key relationship in all of this, but it can often be very hard to hold on to that amidst all the noise. You, as a writer, speaking through characters to tell a compelling story to an audience. So you can see how the job of showrunner requires a multiplicity of skills throughout the making of a show from beginning to end. Sometimes it requires you to kind of be a driven monomaniacal artist. Sometimes it requires you to be a manager of this small corporate entity, not so small even. And sometimes it requires that you have the supportive touch of a mentor or a therapist in managing the people who are working with you and for you. So it's a job that uniquely allows a screenwriter to have control over the content and to see their vision realized. I have a friend, she's a showrunner, who says, at darker moments I'll add, but she says, showrunning is like being beaten to death with your own dreams. It's dark. Sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes it feels like that. It is not a job for the faint of heart, but I will say that at other times, a lot of times, you get to see some of these things that you dream, that you imagine come true. That's sort of how it feels, for example, when, referencing what we just saw, you say to your team, as I did, I have this idea that we probably can't do. There's probably no way to do this, but I want to do a story where our characters come to London and they have this interaction with this guy that they connect to, and at the end of that part of the story, I want them to sail down the Thames River through apocalyptic London on a sailboat. We can't do that, right? That's not possible, is it? And then it turns out to be possible. And then that makes it worth it. That makes it worth it. And then it's not like you're being beaten to death with your own dreams. So that's really what I wanted to go through tonight. I have a couple other things that we can talk about if there's questions towards that, but I think that kind of covers it. And I appreciate your attention and being here.
Floor is open for questions.
Yep.
So as a longtime fan of ER, first of all, I just want to say, in my opinion, it was always the compelling stories. And to me, it didn't matter who the cast members were. So for a show to be on air as long as it was really, it didn't matter who the actors were. It was just year to year to year. It was quality writing, and to your merit as a showrunner for a good chunk of that. That's what really shone, in my opinion. I mean, it really stood out.
Thank you.
So to your merit, excellent work.
Well, thank you. Oh, and I'll just add, I know you have a question, but I will say part of that was because I inherited, I wasn't there at the very beginning, and it started off right. With actors who had a good attitude, with people running that show, my boss, who became my boss, they started it off right. And so I was the beneficiary of that to a large degree, and I learned from that as a result. But it is an exemplary show in terms of that, and it's reflected in what you just pointed out.
There's an art to not screwing it up.
Yeah, well, and approaching it without being too crazy.
But you preserved it, I mean, and there was continuity, so to your credit.
Thank you.
I'd love to talk to you about the pit based on ER, but I won't go into that now. But so I'm curious, as a showrunner, how many hours a week do you work? And secondly,
My wife's here. She'll tell you.
you talk about having to balance the notes that you get from the network and the executives and the balance between the money and the artistry. Can you talk a little bit about how do you
Manage
manage that and stay employed?
The first thing I'll say, the hours, it does vary a lot, but in the thick of it, it's really, it's a 7-day job. It's a 7-day job. And I mean, recently, this job was very hard. We were shooting on location entirely, which is hard because you're not, if you're shooting a show that's partially on stages, you kind of get used to it and it's cushy, it's controlled environment and everything. But if you're constantly on like going into new locations out in the wild and everything, it makes it much more challenging. So that show, we're shooting 12 hours a day. And then I have to either, while we're shooting, do all those other things I was talking about. So, and in that case, I also had the time difference. So people in America would want to talk to me when it was my bedtime. So that was a particularly hard show in terms of hours. But on a regular show, it's still pretty rough. When you're shooting and editing and still writing, you're writing, prepping, shooting, and posting at the same time. It's pretty brutal, and it's definitely, it's usually, it's usually like I'll work and I'll try to come home for dinner, and then we'll have dinner, and then I'll go back to the computer and do other work. So it's a 15-hour day, or something like that, in terms of the real work. The other part of your question, I do think, I don't want to brag, but I've become good at being firm without being a jerk in terms of taking notes. And I really try to tell other writers that I work with and other people who aren't writers who have to deal with network and studio notes the same thing. I'm like, you can receive the note, in a respectful way and still say, like, I'm not going to do that. Usually, I mean, I don't mean it as a ploy, but I guess it's a ploy. Usually I'll say, that's really interesting, let me think about that. I don't mean it to be evasive, but sometimes and sometimes I will take a good note from anywhere. There are people who are like, the network gave the notes, screw the network, we're not listening to the network, right? That's sort of a cliche. I'm not really of that mind. I have enough respect for them to say, like, I'm gonna hear their notes. I'm probably not gonna take 7 out of 10. It's easier as you get into a show too. When you're starting a show, everyone's so nervous and it's a new venture, and even if you're proven, you've done it before, this show is new. So they're not convinced that it's gonna work. So they're going to give you more notes, and they're going to put a little more pressure on you to take their notes. So it certainly gets easy. If you can, like with Daryl Dixon, it was a remarkable change because the first 2 episodes, up until the first 2 episodes, I had a lot of pressure from the Walking Dead universe, from AMC, the network, a lot of pressure. And even from some of the people I was working with who were like, this isn't how we've done The Walking Dead before. This is, it's usually, because I was trying to do something different, which was part of the reason I was brought on. Once they saw the first 2 episodes, everybody got cool. Everybody got cool. So, but I think you have to be firm. It is a tricky thing, because I think some young writers, out of the goodness of their hearts and their ambition, they have a tendency to just take every note. And that's terrible for the work, right? If you just accept every note, yes, you're right, I'm gonna do that, I'll change that, then you've lost your mojo. But also if you're the other person who's like, screw you, I'm not listening to anything you have to say. I wrote what I wrote, and I don't want to hear what you think. That's not good either. So it's just a reasonable compromise. But I do think with young writers, I worry about young writers who are too dutiful because they feel that they need to do that to get through. And I think for them, it's what I said. I think you can engage with the note, think about the note, let them know that you're considering it, but you don't have to do it if you don't believe it, if you don't think it's right. Yes. That's it. Hi.
Yeah. So as you're writing, how much do you keep in mind audience, actor, director, as well as your story? Writer, are you in story and that stuff kind of comes? Or, because it feels like there are so many stakeholders. So how do you navigate all of that?
I think when you're in story, I'm really in story when I'm in story. I mean, the actor thing is a good question because what's great about TV, it can also be burdensome sometimes, but it can be great, is you're working with an actor repeatedly. So it's a little bit of a dance. You're learning what they're good at and what might be interesting for them. They're learning how you're writing for them. And so that can be a very productive relationship. So that is definitely, if you're writing for actors you know, usually when I'm writing a pilot, I don't know who the actors will be, so it's much more liberating. And I'm really doing fully like story, my characters, what's in my head. Once you get into the collaborative part of the process, by definition, you have to sort of go with the flow to some extent. And even like, I might write something and I think it's wonderful, and I cast an actor who I also think is wonderful, but she's different than what I imagined when I wrote it. But I think she's going to be great. I have to change some things because that's what you do. You know, in the theater world, you do that too when you're writing a play. And in TV, it's the same kind of thing. Different than, you know, the beauty when I started out was like, oh, fiction and poetry. I don't have to listen to anybody. I don't have to. I'll just do what which is a great thing. But yeah, in my chosen profession, it's inevitable, and you can't be good at it. I don't think really good at it if you're not able to sort of go, okay, I'm going to meet, like, I have this actor who's not exactly what I imagined, and I have this role, and I have to, what's the best version of that I can put forward? Occasionally you get an actor who's like perfect and exactly right, and they think everything you wrote is beautiful. And that happens too, and that's great. It's being open to that. You have to just stay open. Yeah?
Yeah, so you're talking about these 15-hour days, 7 days a week, and that's likely for your role primarily. However, you mentioned you have a 300-person plus staff. What is the turnover on shows like this? Because I'm sure that, well, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I'll tell you, on a lot of long-running shows, the turnover is not great. Meaning you retain people if they like on ER. ER is the best example. 15-year show, very little turnover on that show. It was a great job. People loved being there. People were treated well, and it worked in LA, which is a big problem now in the business. A lot of things are shooting away, and it's hard for crews in LA to find work at home. And Pitt is actually emulating that. And Pitt is sort of a heroic show for among other reasons, because it's made in LA, and it's giving all these LA people who are really struggling steady jobs that they can come back to. So that the turnover then isn't that big. I found in general, like, people, I mean, I haven't worked on shows that were miserable. I've tried to avoid that because it's sort of on me if it is. So the turnover has not been a problem with crew too much. On this show, it was a little different because we moved countries, so we switched over the entire crew in the second and third season. But yeah, I haven't, like, the key department heads, which would be the production designer, or the composer, or costume designer, those in general have been very steady on the shows I've done, and I've stuck around. I've only done a few shows that ran multiple seasons, you know. So I've run a bunch of shows that were only one season, so turnover's not even an issue there. But like Mercy Street, everybody came back, and Daryl Dixon, everybody who could come back came back, unless they were in France and we were going to Spain, and ER, like I said. Yep.
How do you deal with budgets when filming? And was there ever a time where you felt like you absolutely beyond that? And
Yeah.
how do you deal with those?
Great question, and really like steep learning curve, because I'm not a budget guy or an economics guy. So what happens initially at the very beginning is the studio says, great, we want you to make the show for X amount. And then you say, oh, no, I think it was like X plus Y amount. What do you mean? Because X is definitely not enough. And there's a whole process where you're squabbling over how much money they want to spend on the show and how much money you think you can make the show for. And you immediately get into that phase where you have to sort of make some concessions. Like, oh, I thought we were going to be able to have 100 extras a day, 100 background artists a day. I can't afford to do that on this budget. I can only have 75 a day. That's just a random example. And the beauty though of it is, once you've got the budget, if they're reasonable, which they usually are in this case, but not always, you can move money around. So I can design an episode that's under budget, so that I can afford to make an episode that's bigger, that costs more money, that's more complicated. And so let's say the budget is $100. I'll just use fake numbers. $100 an episode. David, this is the budget for your show. You get $100 an episode. Well, if I make this one for $80, I'm going to make this one for $120, but I'm still on budget. Then there are times where you go over, and then that becomes a big fight. big fight, and they sometimes will say, like they've said this to me at one point on Daryl Dixon, there was a mistake because of exchange rates, foreign exchange rates, and the money got confused really, and so we were over and we didn't know we were over. But we turned out to be over, and at that point, because we filmed everything, the only thing they could do is say, we're taking money away from your visual effects budget. Because that's the only money we can recoup now. Because you've shot everything, you've spent all the money, the only money, significant money that you still have to spend is on the VFX that you do in post-production. And so I had to fight with them about that. And then, you know, I got some give from them, but I also had to say, like, okay, there are a couple shots that would cost $20,000, we're not gonna do those shots. You know, like let's say I have 5 shots that cost $20,000 in an episode. I'll say, okay, we'll do 3 of those shots. We'll take 2 of those shots out. I don't want to do that. I don't like it creatively. But that's where like the adult kind of in charge of a little business has to kick in and say like, we are over budget. Not our fault really. We are over budget though, and the story will survive with 3 out of the 5 VFX shots that I want. And then if you're in production, sometimes that happens too, and then that could be haggling about how much you want to hire an actor, and they say the actor's too expensive, and then you might not be able to hire the actor you want because the actor's too expensive, and you have to go to a different actor. Lots of things like that will come up, and there are a lot of conversations. But that's one of the hardest things for me because that was not in my wheelhouse at all. You know, I was like a theater geek, and you know, and then I'm arguing about tens of thousands of dollars on VFX. Question? Oh, yeah.
Do you have any like favorite shows or directors that you look to for like inspiration and stuff?
For inspiration,
Yeah.
favorite shows or direct? I mean, I also look to movies a lot, not just shows, but to stick to TV. I mean, when I was starting out, to me, The Sopranos was sort of just a tremendous show that I would still love, and was like that was sort of a motivator for me. I also loved 6 Feet Under. I'm just talking about the shows that influenced me then. They're great shows now, but I don't know if that's what you mean. Like, so at the beginning, those were some of the shows where I was aspiring to sort of do something of that quality. I did, you know, I wrote that NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue was a network show and a cop show, but I loved that show. I love that show, and I love David Milch, who wrote that show, created that show, who also did another thing I love, which is a weirder show called Deadwood, a Western on HBO, which I absolutely love, which is iambic pentameter, and it is, you know, he's writing like Shakespearean verse for cowboys, but it's a great show. He was a genius. He was a genius, David Milch. And then, and in movies, a lot of directors. You asked about directors. It really depends on, because I like to mix it up and do different projects, I really look at different directors on different projects. If I'm doing sci-fi, it's different than if I'm doing a cop show, you know, but I'm old-fashioned, so a lot of the directors I like are sort of classic, like 70s, 80s, 90s directors, you know. I love Sidney Lumet, if you know Sidney Lumet. I love his movies. I love Scorsese, you probably know Scorsese, you know. But I also like lighter stuff. I love old James Brooks stuff. He did Broadcast News, a movie I love, you know. So I do try to mix it up, and I have different vibes I'm going for at different times. And I'm very eclectic, I guess, in what I like and what I try to do myself. Question? Yeah.
What's your experience like independent creators, like either directors or writers? How successful are their projects?
Independent?
Like filmmakers, writers, like people who don't really want to like go through bigger systems.
What I go through?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? You're saying, how can I do that without having to deal with all that? Yeah.
But basically, like people who don't want to deal with all that and kind of want to create a project, like how is that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's really hard in the indie. TV doesn't really have an indie business, but it's starting to sort of happen. There are people occasionally making. Mark Duplass, who's a filmmaker, he has done some indie stuff in TV, but it's sort of never been a thing in TV. The concept of sort of indie TV. But I think it's doable. And I think indie film has become so hard just because of the way the film business has gone. But the beauty of it, in my opinion, is younger people have grown up with access to technology where you can go out and make your own thing. And I think that's really the way to go. I think that, you know, there are going to be people who succeed by just going out and making their own thing and not requiring a huge budget to do it, and then make something cool and it'll get someone's attention, and then that'll lead to another project. I think that's the way to go. I mean, if I were younger now, that's what I would be trying to do, is making my own stuff. You know, making my own stuff. I wish even now, I wish I had done that more. I've directed a little bit, but I think now, because of where technology is and how savvy your generation is, I think if I were in your shoes now, I'd be like, I'm going to get a camera, I'm going to write a script, I'm going to get some people who can play the roles I want to do, and we're going to go make it. And we're, you know, and it could be short stuff, right? Because also that's all very open in terms of. This is not totally related to what you're saying, but I was just telling a story about the show The Audacity, which is made by the company that I work for. They just released it, but in order to promote it, they broke up the episode into 21 little parts and put them on TikTok, because they wanted to get young people to watch, and they wanted to grab an audience that they didn't think they could grab any other way. Now that's a little not totally pertinent to what you're saying, but you get the idea of how that's connected, right? I mean, they're saying, like, if we make little bits of this show and put them on TikTok, that's how we're going to get eyeballs. That's how we're going to get people watching it. You know, that's taking a traditional show and trying to use a younger, more modern model to try to get attention. Yep.
Kind of playing off of that, do you like notice like shows and movies being more like plot driven and character driven with like pacing? Do they like have like a shorter attention span and fighting with the audiences?
Say the first. I'm sorry, I missed the first part.
Just like have you noticed like shows and movies or like programs like veering for more like plot driven rather than character driven moments due to like shorter like attention span and stuff, like less like world building and more quiet and like less action?
There's pressure. Is that what you? There's pressure from companies to get things going faster. That's been ongoing for a little while. You know, and I see movies that I grew up on, and they, even to me, even though I love them still, I'm like, wow, I can't believe how slow they are. Like the beginning, like they'll spend 20 minutes sort of setting up the world, setting up the characters, the story. And I think there's a feeling like you have to grab the audience faster, and you have to keep, they like to say turning cards more swiftly, right? Something happens, something else has to happen. We were talking about this a little bit today. You know, so I think and I resist that pressure because I don't think it's great storytelling sometimes. At the same time, I don't want to deny where the audience is really at. You know, I don't want to deny that the audience has an appetite and a taste that's different from what it used to be. So it's a little bit of a delicate balance, you know. But I think it's a good point. There is especially networks and studios are very, like you said, it's sort of why I showed that scene a little bit. That first scene I showed is not important to the plot. It doesn't really matter for the plot. And that's why they didn't care about it. They just didn't care about it. And I just fought for it because I thought it was important for the characters and for the emotion. That was the opening scene of that episode, right? So it sort of goes to your question a little bit. And I had to fight with them, and they just couldn't understand why that was important. Why couldn't I kill a zombie at the beginning? Why I had to have these two people talking and this kid playing the guitar? Like, kill a zombie already. So yeah, it's a good point. And it's a good thing if you're making stories, creating stories. It's a good thing to keep in mind. You try to balance out the sort of appetite for greater pace, but not lose kind of nuanced character building and storytelling. Tricky balance. Yes.
Just relatedly, so I teach a lot of introduction to creative writing, and students in the class are starting to write short stories right now. And what I found in the past is that perfectly lovely young people, when they start writing fiction, will like have all of this gruesome death. Like they just like kill a zombie.
Kill a zombie.
And so it's kind of one serial killer, sometimes cannibalism with the serial killing, and so I kind of veto death. But I think there's probably a more subtle approach, and I'm wondering, what would you say, like, you want to turn cards, you want to have action. How do you think about, like, action in the plot? Or maybe what would you say to kind of a younger writer,
Yeah, it's a really good point, too. I'll go back to ER, but this is a principle I apply to almost everything. On ER, when I was doing ER, we used to say, there has to always be something else. And I would ask the question in the script, what's the something else? By which I meant, it can't just be a scene about doctors sticking something in a patient and trying to save their life. It can't just be about that. It has to be advancing a character story. I think that's true whether you're writing a car chase or you're writing a zombie attack. That's just good writing. So it has to be earned, and it has to really have impact on character, and the aftermath too. Another thing on ER that I was very religious about, that I try to be on this show too, although it's hard on this show, is that I don't want to just kill characters and then move on. Like, that seems gratuitous to me. That seems wrong to me, and the stakes are not high, and the emotions are not. So if somebody's going to die, it has to matter, it has to be about something, it has to mean something, and it has to be absorbed. So I think, though, a general, and I think it applies to short fiction too, I think, is, action is good, people like that stuff, but you have to make sure that the action is elevated by character, and by emotion, and by storytelling, advancing the story. If it's just a car blowing up on a street because you think people, and this applies to me, not to a short story so much, but if I have an episode and someone's written, the car explodes, I'll be like, I don't care about the car exploding.
Well, there are a lot of cars exploding. Earlier, there are many exploding cars. They do explode cars in the short fiction.
Oh, in short story, yeah. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right, okay. So, but it's the same thing, yeah. But in my case, the difference is, in my case, exploding car is very expensive and very difficult to shoot. So you better make it good, because I don't want to just do it because you think it's fun. Yeah.
What are some comments you've received from editors that you think would be helpful for young writers?
From editors, it's really, I learned so much in the editing room. I will tell you, it's the #1 place that I learned the most when I first got to go in an editing room, because it was all new to me. I hadn't done that, as I explained. I think editors really, just sitting in the editing room, you can sort of absorb this yourself, and if you've got a really great sensitive editor, they'll talk you through it too, which both things happen for me. But you learn as a writer what you need and what you don't need. Like, it was painful a lot of times sitting in the editing room at the beginning. It still is sometimes, because I'm like, why did I write that line? Like, why did I write that line? And hopefully I didn't need it at all, and I can just make it go away. Sometimes I can't make it go away. But it really teaches you kind of what works and what doesn't work. And it really helps for the writer. Because when you're writing, this is a problem that a lot of young writers have. They're writing, and I had the benefit of theater, but not of film and TV. Some writers don't have the benefit of either particularly. They're just smart, good writers maybe, but they're writing in a way that they're not really imagining how it's going to play. How is it going to play? And watching in an editing room and seeing how a scene worked or didn't work as well as you wanted it to really teaches you to when you're writing, to be thinking about, how is this going to play? How is this going to come out of an actor's mouth? And is this giving the actor enough to play what needs to be played, but not too much, because too much is always bad. So I think it's a really valuable thing. And I love editors, and I think of editors as almost like writers. Like I said, I mean, that is the final rewrite. So my relationship with editors is very personal and direct, because we sit in there and we go, like, what's working, what's not working, how do we make it work, how can we make it better, why did it, and if it's a friend or someone who knows me well enough, they'll be like, why'd you write that, David? Why is it like that? Why, I'll say thanks a lot. Does that answer your question? Yep.
I think it's pretty inspiring from what you said that you didn't start in this industry until you were 29 or something.
Yeah, that was my first job. Yeah.
But I think it's inspiring to young writers. But what was your writing life before that? Like, from when you said you wanted to go into writing at 20 to 29, right. Were you honing your skills every day? Were you reading up, or
I was writing. Yeah. So in college, like I said, I started and I was writing poetry and short fiction, and then I wrote less for a period of time when I was sort of deep into theater. I wrote a couple plays, and then I wrote some more plays later. So, but I really stopped writing other stuff besides plays. I pretty much stopped writing other stuff. I wrote a couple stories during that period. And then once I came to LA, which was, only a year or so before I got that job, that's when I kind of caught fire, because I had written some plays, I was producing some plays, and I was reading scripts, and I was really reading scripts, real scripts, meaning scripts that people were making, and that writers were getting paid for, and thinking, I wasn't intimidated by that. Because there were some that were very good, but there were some that were just, a shoddy script gave me great confidence. Reading a shoddy script, it made me think like, well, I can be just as shoddy as that person, and so it bolstered me. So then when I got to, for that period of time, I was writing a lot, and I was writing every day, and that was when I was writing Broken English, which was that first script, and I was writing those. I wrote 3 samples actually. The one I left out because it was after I'd already gotten a job, but the third sample I wrote at the very beginning was a sample for a show called ER, which never factored in to anything, had no relevance. Like I never showed it to anybody. But I had written in ER 4 years before I got hired into ER.
Time for one more question.
Yep.
So you've talked a lot about collaboration, human talent, creativity, 300 people on a set. So it makes me wonder.
Sorry, just to be clear, maybe I was, not 300 on a set, 300 on the whole show.
300 on the show.
Yeah, sorry, including post-production. And,
300 people.
Could be 100,
collaborating
over
and
100 on a set often.
Right, but real people.
Yeah.
So my question is, can you share any insight or your opinions about the threat of AI affecting your work? You know, you hear about actors now granting their likenesses instead of them actually doing performance. So, you know, what do you think about how that might evolve?
I think it's really scary, and I think people are really, I mean, the immediate people that I work with and know are really worried about it. I think for writers it's probably most imminent. I think writers have the most immediate threat, and then probably actors and directors. I think directors will still direct even if you're generating AI material and AI performances. But that'll get up to them too, to directors. It'll get up to the whole business. I think it's a really scary thing. I'm a very low-tech guy, so I'm not that attuned to it. I've never used AI, but I tell you this, when we were getting notes on Daryl Dixon, the writers I was working with, some of whom were younger and a little more savvy, they're like, these are AI notes, David. These notes are not from executives. The executives ran the script through a program, and these notes are generated by AI. And I have to admit, when I looked at it like that, I was like, oh yeah, they do seem a little robotic. They seem robotic, and they seem like sort of reflexive without being thoughtful. So, I mean, I wish I had something more insightful to say about that. I'm worried about it. I think it's very nervous-making, and I don't know what. But they're trying to deal with it, right? They're trying to like make deals between the guilds, like the Writers Guild, that you can't use AI for this, to the studios, and now we're saying you can't use AI for this, and you can't use AI for that. If you're using AI, the writer has to be aware that you're using AI. But there are lots of stories I'm hearing about sort of clear and pressing danger from AI. There's a show I just caught by accident recently. It's really quite funny. But the reason I watched it was because I heard it was about a show being made with AI writers. It's this Lisa Kudrow show called The Comeback. And it's kind of cool because it's addressing that issue in a comedic way, but seriously too. Like not a joke. Like they're trying to sort of, from a comedic perspective, address that issue of what happens when you have a show that's written by a computer. So I have never dealt with it directly. You know, it had, as far as I know, the only thing is that one thing I just mentioned. Maybe I'm getting notes from AI, and I don't even know it. I've never dealt with it directly, I haven't yet felt directly threatened by it, but I see it coming down the road.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.